The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty track, each ray seeming to amplify the despair radiating from Thomas Ashton. His ancient wagon, laden with the meager supplies he'd managed to trade for in the distant market town, lay crippled by the roadside, one of its rear wheels splintered and askew like a broken bone. He kicked at the offending wheel, a gesture of pure, impotent fury that sent a small cloud of dust puffing into the still air. Grief had been his constant companion for 5 long years, ever since Sarah had been taken from him, but today, despair was a heavier shroud. He was old, tired, and everything he touched seemed to crumble to dust, much like his hopes. The farm, once their shared dream, was now a monument to his failings, its fields less fertile, its fences sagging. This broken wagon was just another nail in the coffin of his spirit. He sank onto a tree stump, the rough bark biting into his worn trousers, and buried his face in his calloused hands. What was the use? The nearest help was miles away, and he had neither the strength nor the coin to easily remedy this. A small voice, clear as a brook over pebbles, startled him. "Is something wrong with your wagon, mister?" Thomas looked up, his eyes raw. A young girl, no more than 10 or 11, stood a few feet away, her expression one of solemn curiosity. She was slight, with sun-bleached hair escaping a practical braid, and her bare feet were dusty. A farm girl, then. He'd passed a small, tidy homestead a little way back. "Wrong," he grumbled, his voice raspy from disuse and sorrow. "The wheel shattered, girl. That's what's wrong. Beyond fixing by the likes of me, or you." He instantly regretted his harshness. It wasn't her fault he was broken. Ilara, for that was her name, was not easily deterred by adult gruffness. She'd seen her share of it, living on the edge of things. She tilted her head, her gaze, an unnervingly direct blue, fixed on the damaged wheel. "My grandpa taught me a bit about fixing things," she said, her tone simple, matter-of-fact. "He used to say there's always a way, if you look hard enough." Thomas almost scoffed. A child, talking about fixing a heavily laden wagon wheel. The absurdity of it was almost laughable, if he had any laughter left in him. "This isn't some toy cart, child," he said, a weary edge to his voice. "It needs tools, strength, know-how. Things a little girl wouldn't possess." He waved a dismissive hand. "Best run along." "Nothing for you here." He meant to be final, to retreat back into his cocoon of misery, but the girl didn't move. Instead, she took a step closer, her eye still scrutinizing the axle and the splintered spokes, her brow furrowed in concentration. He saw the patched knees of her dress, the earnest set of her small jaw, and a flicker of something akin to Sarah's quiet determination. It was an unwelcome echo, one he tried to push away. Ilara circled the broken wheel slowly, her small hands clasped behind her back, mimicking an old artisan she'd once seen at the county fair. Thomas watched, a reluctant Sisyphus observing and considering his boulder. He expected her to give up, to pronounce it hopeless as he had, but she stopped, pointing. "The main axle joint looks strained, but not cracked," she declared, her voice surprisingly firm. "And the iron tire isn't too badly bent. It's mostly the wooden spokes and the hub that have split. If we could brace it, get the weight off." Thomas grunted. "And how do you propose we do that, little Miss Expert?" "With wishes and dandelion fluff." His sarcasm was a shield, warding off the faint, unfamiliar stirring of something that might have been hope, or perhaps just annoyance at this persistent child. Undeterred, Ilara said, "We have a sturdy jack at our farm and strong timbers. Papa uses them for lifting the old cider press. And Grandpa left behind his tool chest. It has everything." She looked at him directly. "It's not far. I can fetch my brother, Will, and the jack. We could at least try to get it stable enough to limp to our barn. You can't leave it here." Her earnestness was a strange counterpoint to his cynicism. He was about to refuse again, to tell her to leave him to his fate, when she knelt by the wheel. Her small, nimble fingers probed the shattered wood, gently testing the integrity of the remaining pieces. As she moved, a glint of silver on her right hand caught the sunlight, a tiny sparkle against her work-roughened skin. It was a ring, a simple band, too large for her finger, secured with a piece of carefully wound string to keep it from slipping off. Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. His heart, a leaden thing for so many years, gave a painful lurch. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Yet, the shape, the dull gleam of worn silver, the almost imperceptible, unique twist in its design where the ends met, it was achingly, devastatingly familiar. He stared, his mind reeling, the broken wagon, the girl, the dusty road, all receding into a blur as an image seared itself onto his vision, Sarah's young face, smiling, as he slipped that very ring onto her finger, a lifetime ago, under the shade of the old whispering willow by the creek. A ring he had fashioned himself from a silver coin, a symbol of their fledgling love and dreams, lost so many years past, a loss that had been another small death before the great one. A wave of dizziness washed over Thomas. He leaned heavily against the tree stump, his gaze locked on the ring. Elara, sensing his sudden distress, looked up from the wheel, her blue eyes wide with concern. "Mister? Are you all right? You've gone pale as a sheet." He struggled to find his voice, the words catching like thorns in his throat. "The ring," he finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. Where did you get that ring?" Elara looked down at her hand, a slight blush rising on her cheeks. She touched the silver band almost reverently. "This? It was a gift. From my Grandma Elms. She said it was special." "Grandma Elms?" Thomas repeated, the name unfamiliar. His mind raced. How could this be? Sarah had lost the ring years before she left him. She'd mourned its loss, not for its monetary value, which was negligible, but for what it represented. They had searched, but it was as if the earth had swallowed it. And now, here it was, on the finger of a child he'd met only moments ago, a child offering him help he hadn't believed possible. "Yes, she lives with us," Elara explained, her initial concern shifting to a shy pride. "She doesn't remember things so well anymore, but she remembers this ring. She said it had a story, but she couldn't quite catch it, like a fish slipping off the line. A fragile tendril of something akin to purpose, something he hadn't felt in an age, began to unfurl within Thomas. This ring, it was a piece of Sarah, a tangible link to a time when joy was not a foreign country. He had to know. He had to understand. "Your grandma Elms, you said. Would it be possible for me to speak with her?" he asked, his voice still rough but now imbued with an urgent plea that surprised even himself. "About the ring?" Elara nodded readily. "Of course. But first, let's see to your wagon. We can't just leave it. I'll run and get Will and the jack. You wait here. We'll be back before you know it," and with a determined nod, she turned and sprinted down the track towards the direction of her farm, her bare feet kicking up little puffs of dust, the silver ring a fleeting beacon in the afternoon sun. Thomas watched her go, his heart a maelstrom of disbelief, grief, and a bewildering, nascent flicker of hope. The world, which had been grey and stagnant for so long, suddenly seemed awash with improbable light. True to her word, Elara returned within 20 minutes, not just with her older brother Will, a sturdy lad of about 15, but also with a heavy-duty screw jack and a selection of wooden blocks. Will, though initially curious about the stranger, deferred to his sister's quiet instructions regarding the wagon. Thomas watched, mostly in silence, as the two children worked with a synergy that spoke of long practice. Elara directed the placement of the jack with the precision of a seasoned engineer, her small hands guiding the heavy timber supports. Will provided the muscle, turning the jack's handle steadily, lifting the corner of the laden wagon inch by painful inch. "Easy now, Will," Elara cautioned, her eyes darting between the rising wagon bed and the protesting axle. "We don't want to shift the load too much." Thomas found himself offering advice, almost involuntarily. "You'll need to chock the other wheels securely. Front and back." Will nodded, already grabbing some rough-hewn chocks Elara had also thought to bring. The initial repair was a temporary affair, a clever bracing of the shattered hub and spokes with stout pieces of wood lashed tightly with rope, but it was Elara's assessment of the axle and her confident handling of the tools that truly astonished Thomas. She selected a wrench from a small canvas roll she'd brought, expertly tightening a bolt that had worked loose near the damaged hub, her movements economical and sure. The ring on her finger flashed as she worked, a constant, painful reminder of the mystery that now consumed him far more than the fate of his cargo. Within an hour, the wagon was, if not roadworthy, at least capable of being slowly moved. It listed precariously, but the makeshift repair held. "It should get you to our barn, Mr. Ilara said, wiping a smear of grease from her cheek with the back of her hand. "Papa can help look at it more proper tomorrow." Thomas looked from the surprisingly stable wheel to the earnest faces of the two children. A profound sense of shame washed over him for his earlier dismissal. I don't know how to thank you," he stammered, the words feeling inadequate. "You've done more for me than anyone has in a long time." He cleared his throat, the earlier urgency returning. "Now, about your grandmother and the ring." Ilara smiled, a bright, genuine expression that briefly pierced through his gloom. "Come on, then. Our farm is just over that rise. Grandma will be in her chair by the window. She likes to watch the road." The farmhouse was small but immaculately kept, with a porch adorned with pots of surprisingly vibrant geraniums. Inside, it was cool and smelled faintly of baked bread and dried herbs. An elderly woman sat in a rocking chair by a sunlit window, a colorful quilt draped over her knees, her gaze distant. This was Grandma Elms. Her hair was white as snow, and her face a delicate map of wrinkles, but her eyes, when they focused on Ilara, held a gentle, loving light. Ilara introduced Thomas softly. "Grandma, this is Mr. Ashton. He needed some help with his wagon. And he was asking about your special ring. The one you gave me." Grandma Elm's gaze drifted to Ilara's hand, then to Thomas, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "The ring," she murmured, her voice thin and papery. "Yes, pretty silver." Thomas sat on a stool. Ilara's mother, a kind-faced woman named Martha, offered him. He spoke gently, his heart pounding. "Mrs. Elms, that ring is very familiar to me. Could you tell me where you found it?" The old woman's brow furrowed. Memories, for her, were like elusive butterflies. "Found it?" She paused, her fingers pleating the quilt. "Long ago, so long ago. By the water, no, not water. A place of stones." Her eyes unfocused, looking inward. "There was a tree, a big, old sycamore. And the well, yes, the old, dry well. No one goes there now." Thomas leaned forward, his breath catching. "A dry well? Near a sycamore tree?" He knew such a place. It was on the very edge of his own property, or what should have been his property, bordering the vast, unscrupulously acquired lands of Silas Blackwood. "Sadness there," Grandma Elms whispered, her voice barely audible. "A woman, crying. Lost something precious. I saw her there sometimes, looking, always looking." She reached out a trembling hand and touched the ring on Ilara's finger. "I found it later, nestled in the moss by a stone. After she stopped coming." Her gaze drifted back to the window. "Poor thing. Such sorrow." She then looked at Thomas with a sudden, startling clarity. "Sarah. Her name was Sarah, I think. Pretty, like the ring." The name, spoken aloud by this frail woman, struck Thomas like a physical blow. Sarah. His Sarah. Crying by the old well. Looking for her lost ring. The pieces clicked into place with agonizing precision. The well was near the boundary line, the boundary that had been the source of so much bitterness, the land that Silas Blackwood's father had allegedly swindled from Sarah's parents years before Thomas had even met her. Sarah had never given up trying to find proof, to reclaim that small parcel of inheritance. She must have lost the ring during one of her searches, her fruitless, heartbreaking searches. A storm of emotion surged through Thomas, grief, fresh and sharp as shattered glass, rage at the injustice Sarah had faced, and a burgeoning, fierce determination he hadn't known he still possessed. This ring, found by a child's keen eye and an old woman's fragmented memory, wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a sign. A call to action. Sarah's fight was not over. He looked at Ilara, who was watching him with an expression of deep empathy. "Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that well your grandmother spoke of. I know it. Would you show me exactly where she means? Where she found the ring?" Ilara nodded without hesitation. "Tomorrow, first light. I know the old sycamore well. It's where the rarest mushrooms grow after the rains." That night, Thomas lay on a cot in the barn, the scent of hay and animals a strangely comforting balm. Sleep eluded him. The image of Sarah by the well, her face etched with sorrow, haunted him. He thought of Silas Blackwood, wealthy, arrogant, living comfortably on land that held Sarah's tears. For years, Thomas had let grief consume him, let the fight die with Sarah. But now, holding the memory of that ring in his mind, something had shifted. Ilara's innocent courage, her grandmother's unexpected revelation, it was as if Sarah herself was urging him on. As dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and grey, Thomas rose, a new resolve hardening his gaze. The fight for a broken wagon was over, the fight for Sarah's legacy was just beginning. Ilara was waiting for him by the barn door, a small wicker basket over her arm, ostensibly for mushrooms, but her eyes told him she understood the deeper purpose of their journey. Together, they walked through the dew-kissed fields, the rising sun casting long shadows before them. The old sycamore stood like a lonely sentinel at the edge of a fallow field, its branches gnarled and reaching. Beside it, almost swallowed by overgrown brambles and weeds, was the circular stone parapet of the disused well. "Grandma said it was right here," Ilara whispered, pointing to a patch of mossy earth at the foot of the sycamore, close to the well's edge. "She found it glinting after a rain shower." Thomas knelt, his fingers tracing the cool, damp moss. This was where Sarah had stood, where she had lost a part of herself. He felt an almost overwhelming sense of her presence. As he scanned the area, Ilara, with her sharp young eyes, was already exploring the crumbling stonework of the well itself. "Mr. Ashton," she called out softly, "look at this." She pointed to one of the heavy stones that formed the well's circular wall. It was slightly dislodged, a darker, different type of rock than its neighbors, as if it didn't quite belong or had been disturbed more recently than the others. Driven by an instinct he couldn't explain, Thomas fetched a sturdy branch Ilara found and, using it as a lever, worked with all his might. The stone groaned, then shifted, revealing a small, dark cavity behind it. Reaching into the dusty recess, his fingers brushed against something smooth and yielding. He pulled it out. It was a small, oilskin-wrapped package, surprisingly well preserved despite the years. His heart hammered against his ribs. What secrets did this forgotten hollow hold? Just as he was about to inspect it, a harsh voice startled them. "Trespassing, are we, Ashton? And corrupting children now, too." It was Jebediah Crow, Silas Blackwood's foreman, a hulking man with eyes like chips of flint. He had a sneer permanently etched on his face. Crow's sudden appearance confirmed Thomas's growing suspicion. This land, this well, was still a sensitive point for Blackwood. The package in his hand suddenly felt heavier, more significant. Thomas tucked the oilskin package safely into his coat pocket, his hand protectively covering it. "This is my land, Crow, or close enough to it. And this girl is a friend." He met the foreman's hostile gaze with a newfound steel in his own. "We're merely admiring the morning." Crow snorted. "Admiring, eh? More like snooping. Mr. Blackwood don't like snoopers on his property. Especially not failed farmers with fanciful notions." He gave Ilara a dismissive glare. "Best you run along, girl. This old fool's trouble is catching." Ilara stood her ground, her small hand surprisingly finding Thomas's. "I'm not afraid of bullies," she said, her voice clear and steady, though Thomas could feel a slight tremor in her fingers. Crow's eyes narrowed, but he seemed to decide they weren't worth further immediate confrontation. "Just a friendly warning, Ashton. Stay off Blackwood land. And keep your wild ideas to yourself." With a final, contemptuous look, he turned and lumbered away, disappearing back towards the imposing stone walls that marked the boundary of Blackwood's estate. Once he was gone, Thomas let out a shaky breath. "Here's a nasty piece of work." He looked down at Ilara, a surge of gratitude warming him. "Thank you, child. For your courage, he patted his pocket. Now, let's see what Sarah left for us. They found a sheltered spot beneath the sycamore, hidden from the main track. With trembling fingers, Thomas unwrapped the oilskin. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle and faded, but the ink, though faint, was still legible. It was Sarah's handwriting. A wave of emotion so intense it nearly buckled him swept through Thomas. It was like hearing her voice again after years of silence. The journal entries, penned with meticulous care, detailed Sarah's quiet investigation into the land her family had lost. She wrote of her suspicions about how Jedediah Blackwood, Silas's father, had allegedly moved boundary markers under the cover of night decades ago, how he'd exploited her own grandfather's illiteracy and failing health. She described her fruitless searches for the original survey maps, her attempts to find witnesses, all met with fear or polite dismissal. There were sketches of the land, notes on old deeds she'd managed to examine at the county office, and poignant expressions of her frustration and dwindling hope. Then, an entry near the end caught Thomas's eye. Found something today. By the old North Oak, not the sycamore. A glint of metal. Could it be the original marker? Too deeply embedded. Must come back with tools. The ring slipped from my finger as I scrabbled in the dirt. Searched for hours. Gone. Another loss. Heart heavy. The North Oak. Not the sycamore. Sarah had been searching in multiple locations. The ring was lost during a moment of potential discovery. Ilara, reading over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in concentration, pointed to a small, intricate sketch on the same page. It depicted a section of a ring, specifically the join, where a tiny, almost invisible chip was noted with an arrow and the words, "My mark." "'Tis love." "Your ring," Ilara breathed, looking from the sketch to Thomas. She drew it. She knew it was special. Before Thomas could fully process this, the long shadow of Silas Blackwood himself fell over them. He must have been alerted by Crow. Blackwood was a stout man, his face florid, his clothes expensive. He radiated an aura of smug entitlement. Well, Ashton. Crow told me you were disturbing the peace." "And what's this?" "Rummaging through trash with this child." He peered at the journal in Thomas's hand with open disdain. "More of your deceased wife's fantasies, I presume? Some say grief addles the brain." "You, my dear Ashton, are living proof." His voice was smooth, like oil on troubled waters, but with an underlying current of menace. He gestured vaguely at the land around them. "This is Blackwood land, Ashton. Has been for generations. Accept it. Move on. Before you cause real trouble for yourself, and for this little girl's family." His gaze flickered towards Ilara, a subtle but unmistakable threat. Thomas felt a cold fury rise within him, but he kept his voice even. "This journal, Mr. Blackwood, tells a different story. My wife was no fantasist. She was a woman of integrity, searching for the truth your father tried to bury." Blackwood chuckled, a humorless sound. "Truth? The truth is that your wife chased windmills, Ashton. And you, it seems, are determined to follow in her unfortunate footsteps. That land was legally acquired. Deeds were signed. Deeds can be forged, Mr. Blackwood, boundaries can be moved," Thomas countered, Sarah's words echoing in his mind. He held up the journal. Sarah found evidence. She was close to proving it. "Evidence?" Blackwood sneered. "The ramblings of a desperate woman in a dusty old book. That will hardly stand up in any sensible forum. You have nothing, Ashton. Nothing but bitterness and a very overactive imagination." He then turned his attention to Ilara, his voice dripping with condescension. "And you, little girl? You should be at home, playing with dolls, not getting involved in adult matters you couldn't possibly understand. Some might say your parents are neglectful, allowing you to associate with such a troubled individual." Ilara's chin lifted. "Mr. Ashton is a good man. And my parents taught me that truth matters, no matter how powerful the person trying to hide it." Blackwood's eyes hardened. "Brave words, child. But bravery doesn't pay the bills, nor does it protect a small farm from unforeseen difficulties. The threat, no longer subtle, hung heavy in the air. He gave them one last dismissive look. "I suggest you burn that pathetic little book, Ashton." For everyone's sake, with that, he turned on his heel and strode away, confident in his power and Thomas's perceived weakness. Thomas watched him go, his hand tightening on Sarah's journal. Blackwood's arrogance, his casual cruelty, only solidified Thomas's resolve. He looked at Ilara, whose small face was set with a fierce determination that mirrored his own. "He thinks he's won," Thomas said softly. "He doesn't know Sarah. And he certainly doesn't know you, Ilara." He tapped the journal. Sarah mentioned a north oak and a marker. And this sketch of the ring, the chip, if that marker still exists, and if Sarah made a note of it, perhaps related to its unique features. A desperate idea, a long shot, began to form. "Ilara, your eyes are sharper than mine. Did Sarah write anything else about what she found by that north oak? Any other mark or symbol?" Ilara carefully turned the fragile pages. "Here," she said, pointing. "She writes, the marker was old iron, almost buried. Saw a faint X, and below it, something like a tiny half-moon, chipped on one edge, just like the mark on my silver band where T joined it so imperfectly she connected the chip on the ring to a chip on the marker." Thomas stared at the words, then at Ilara, a wild hope dawning. The ring. The ring was the key, not just as a symbol of his love for Sarah, but as a tangible link to the proof they needed. The unique imperfection he'd accidentally made when crafting it, a tiny chip at the join, was something Sarah had noted on the very boundary marker she'd found. "Blackwood doesn't know about the ring's detail, or this journal entry," Thomas breathed. "He thinks it's just a story." The following week was a blur of quiet activity. Thomas, with Ilara as his indefatigable assistant and her family as steadfast supporters, pored over Sarah's journal and old parish maps Ilara's father procured from a sympathetic clerk at the county office. The north oak mentioned in Sarah's journal was still standing, a venerable giant on a stretch of land Blackwood used for grazing. It was dangerously close to Blackwood's main house. They knew a direct confrontation on his land to search for the marker would be met with force. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Blackwood, in his arrogance, had applied to the local council for permission to clear a section of his woodland for a new, grander entrance to his estate. The plan included felling the ancient north oak. A public meeting was called for villagers to voice any objections. It was their only chance. The small town hall was packed. Silas Blackwood sat at the front, flanked by his lawyer, looking supremely confident. When the floor opened for objections, Thomas Ashton, clean-shaven and wearing his best, albeit threadbare, suit, stood up. A murmur went through the crowd. Most knew him as the reclusive widower, a broken man. "I object to the felling of the north oak," Thomas began, his voice surprisingly strong. "Not just because it is an ancient landmark, but because it stands on land that is not rightfully Mr. Blackwood's. It stands on land belonging to the estate of Sarah Ashton, my late wife." An audible gasp filled the room. Blackwood scoffed loudly. "This is preposterous. The man is clearly delusional. I have deeds, legally registered, proving my ownership. Deeds that were based on fraudulent boundary claims made by your father, Mr. Blackwood," Thomas retorted, his gaze unwavering. He held up Sarah's journal. "My wife spent years gathering evidence of this fraud. This journal details her findings, including her discovery of an original boundary marker near that very oak tree." Blackwood's lawyer stood. "Hearsay and scribblings in a diary. This is an insult to the council's time. Mr. Ashton has no proof, only grief-fueled accusations." "Oh, but there is proof," Thomas said, his voice ringing with conviction. He turned to Ilara, who sat with her parents, her small face pale but resolute. "Ilara, would you show them?" All eyes turned to the little girl as she walked to the front, clutching something in her hand. She held up the simple silver ring, its worn surface glinting under the hall lights. "This was Mrs. Ashton's ring," Ilara said, her voice clear and carrying. "Mr. Ashton made it for her." It has a tiny, unique chip, a mistake he made, right where the silver joins. She then held up a careful drawing she and Thomas had made, a magnified copy of Sarah's sketch from the journal. Mrs. Ashton wrote in her journal that she found an old iron boundary marker under the north oak. She said it had an X and a half-moon symbol, and that the half-moon was chipped, just like her ring. She recognized the pattern of the imperfection. Blackwood laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. A child's story? A chipped ring and a fanciful drawing? Is this your ground evidence, Ashton? You insult our intelligence. The marker is still there, Mr. Blackwood, Ilara stated calmly, looking directly at the powerful man. Under the north oak. If the council permits, we can show you. If it has the X and the chipped half-moon, just as Sarah described, and as it matches the unique flaw on this ring Mr. Ashton himself crafted, then it proves her journal is true. It proves the boundary was moved. A hush fell over the room. The simplicity of the claim, the earnestness of the child, the unexpected connection between a love token and a land dispute, was compelling. The head of the council, a stern but fair-minded woman named Mrs. Gable, looked from Blackwood's furious face to Thomas's quiet determination, and then to Ilara's unwavering gaze. Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Gable said, her tone crisp. Given the seriousness of this claim, and the potential injustice, I believe a brief adjournment to examine this supposed marker is warranted. If it is not there, or does not match, this matter is closed. If it does? She left the implication hanging in the air. Blackwood began to bluster, but the tide of public opinion in the small hall was turning. Reluctantly, furiously, he had no choice but to agree to the on-site inspection. A small procession, led by Mrs. Gable and other council members, with Thomas, Ilara, her parents, and a fuming Silas Blackwood, made its way to the North Oak. Villagers followed at a respectful distance, a current of anticipation crackling in the air. At the base of the ancient tree, the ground was thick with leaf litter and tangled roots. Here, Ilara said, pointing to a spot indicated in Sarah's journal relative to a distinctive burl on the oak's trunk. She said it was almost swallowed by the earth. Thomas, armed with a spade provided by Ilara's father, began to dig. The soil was dense, compacted by time. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Blackwood watched, a smirk playing on his lips, clearly expecting this to be a fool's errand. After several minutes of digging, the spade struck something hard with a dull clang. Thomas dropped to his knees, clearing away the earth with his hands. Slowly, an object emerged, a rusted iron bar, deeply embedded. As more of it was uncovered, faint markings became visible. An X. And below it, a crescent shape, a half-moon. A collective intake of breath came from the onlookers. Thomas's hand trembled as he gently cleaned the half-moon symbol. There, on its upper curve, was a distinct, undeniable chip, an irregular nick in the rusted metal. Ilara stepped forward, holding out the silver ring. She carefully placed it alongside the iron marker. The tiny chip on the ring, the small, accidental flaw Thomas had made all those years ago, was an exact mirror, in miniature, of the chip on the ancient boundary marker. The imperfection he had once regretted was now the undeniable seal of truth. Silas Blackwood's face went ashen. The smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, then dawning horror. There was no arguing with the silent testimony of the chipped ring and the equally chipped marker. Sarah's journal, every word, was vindicated. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, no longer just curious, but angry and accusatory. Mrs. Gable looked sternly at Blackwood. It seems, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice carrying clearly, that Mr. Ashton's claim has considerable merit. The council will be launching a full investigation into the historical deeds and boundaries of your property, starting with this clear evidence. Blackwood, for the first time in his life, looked utterly defeated. His arrogance crumbled, leaving behind a hollow, frightened man. He stammered, protested weakly, but no one was listening. The truth, unearthed by a grieving husband's renewed hope and a little girl's keen observation, had finally come to light. In the weeks that followed, Silas Blackwood's empire of deceit unraveled. The investigation confirmed that his father had indeed fraudulently altered boundaries, robbing several families, including Sarah's, of their rightful land. Faced with irrefutable evidence and public disgrace, Blackwood's influence evaporated. Some of the land was restored to the descendants of those cheated, other parts were designated for community use. His grand plans for a new estate entrance lay in ruins, much like his reputation. For Thomas Ashton, it wasn't about riches. The small parcel of land rightfully returned to him, the parcel containing the North Oak and the Old Well, became a place of peace. He didn't farm it extensively. Instead, with Ilara and her family's help, they cleared the brambles around the well and planted a small memorial garden for Sarah, with wildflowers and a simple stone bench beneath the shade of the old sycamore. The silver ring, Ilara insisted, belonged with Thomas. He wore it on a chain around his neck, close to his heart, a reminder not just of his beloved Sarah, but of the incredible child who had helped him find his way back from despair. Ilara became something of a local legend, that girl who saw the truth, but she remained unchanged, a quiet, observant child with an uncommon talent for fixing things, whether they were broken wagons or broken hearts. Thomas became a fixture in her family's life, a beloved honorary grandfather, sharing his stories and his rekindled wisdom. He taught Ilara more about mechanics and farming, and she, in turn, taught him about the resilient power of hope and the simple courage of seeing the world with clear eyes. The community learned a valuable lesson, that truth can be found in the most unexpected places, and that even the smallest hand, guided by kindness and a sharp mind, can unearth justice and heal the deepest wounds. The wind still whispered through the branches of the North Oak, but now, it seemed to Thomas, it carried a song of peace, a testament to a love that endured and a truth that had finally set him free.